Hello, everyone. Good morning, good evening. Welcome to PMP Lessons Learned session. So today I will be sharing my lessons learned. As you all know, I have recently taken PMP exam just to know what are the changes, which are the topics which are important from exam perspective. So first I will be sharing my overall experience in 10 different questions or 10 different lessons, and then I will be taking your questions if there are any. It would be great if you turn on your videos during the sessions. Also keep yourself on mute. You can unmute yourself whenever you have a question. All right, I hope I'm audible. Is my voice loud and clear, everyone?
Yes.
Yes, Shamal.
Yep.
Yes.
All right, great. Just keep yourself on mute. And when you have a question, you can raise your hand and you can unmute yourself. All right, so let me just share my screen. A lot of students were reporting PMI has introduced various changes regarding PMP exam. Some were saying exam is more inclined towards agile. Some were saying there are more scenario-based questions. Some were saying like people domain is important. So I took PMP exam on 26th of Feb and I passed the exam. For me, it was easy and simple, but I understand from a student perspective, it was a little challenging. So I'll be sharing all the details like different sections of the exam, which areas were important, how did I manage my time, and what are different types of questions. So I'll be sharing everything in detail. Right, so let's start. So first of all, very important question, what is the percentage of agile, waterfall, or hybrid? You all know there are three methodologies in project management, predominant methodologies, agile and waterfall, and combination of both is hybrid. So for me, in my exam, purely agile portion was around 40%. So 40% of the exam was agile, 30% of agile was 30% exam was waterfall, and remaining 30% of the exam was hybrid. So there were a lot of questions in the exam in which an organization was transitioning from waterfall to agile. So I consider those questions as hybrid questions. So a lot of students, they share their views like 90% of the exam is agile, 80% of the exam is agile. My exam was not that much agile. Maybe, for example, if in a question it says you're working in an agile organization and you have to motivate team members, which motivation technique you would be using? I'm just giving an example. So it doesn't mean this question is an agile question just because word agile is used in that. I'm talking about agile specifically from agile methodology perspective, from steps, from Scrum perspective. So 40% questions were relevant to agile. And waterfall portion was also there, and hybrid portion was also there. You need to spend equal amount of time on these two methodologies if you really want to pass the exam. And I'll be sharing some questions as well, not exactly the same questions because there's an NDA with PMI. We cannot share the question, even if you will be taking the questions, you won't be sharing. So just I'll be giving you an idea what sort of question you can expect in the exam. So first of all, this 40% of the exam was agile, 30% was waterfall, and 30% was hybrid. Okay, next. What are the main topics that I saw in my exam? Interestingly, the dominant portion of the exam was about leadership. It was about generic leadership expertise. As a leader, what are the skills that you need to have? So for example, I have written some of those leadership styles, delegation, authorization, conflict management, motivation, team charter, decision-making, negotiation, training and development, emotion. So these were the topics which were very, very recurrent in the exam. I would say almost 50% of the questions were relevant to this topic. So exam was not very technical. Like there were no question, this is the sprint length, Would you reduce the sprint length? What are the things that you discuss in, sprint retrospectives? Which technique for estimation do you use? There were no such question in the exam. Exam was more generic, like your leadership expertise. As a project manager, how would you be leading the team? So leadership and power skills are very important from exam perspective. The second important topic was stakeholders engagement, how you engage with your stakeholders. You'll see a lot of question in the exam where stakeholders are not happy, they are complaining, they're not getting right information, they're not engaged, uh, you haven't received right information from them. When you present the product, they reject the product. So there would be a lot of questions like that. So you should focus a lot of time in understanding how to engage with the stakeholders, right? I'll be talking about some of the techniques, like how you can engage with the stakeholders, be proactive. I have written some of the good practices as well. Then relevant to stakeholders, transparent communication, very important topic. Whenever something happens, you should focus on communicating to the relevant stakeholders. So communication is also an important topic from exam perspective. And then scope management, because ultimately you will be delivering your project. So first of all, you need to understand your scope, and especially in agile projects, scope is very important. Because if you don't understand customers' needs and customer requirements, then you'll end up building something that is not required by the customer. So understanding customers' need is very important. So next topic was scope management. And then from processes side, risk management were important. I can safely say there were 10 to 15 questions regarding risk management. So risk management is very important. So risk versus issue, you should have clarity about it. You should have understanding about risk register versus issue log. You should have understanding about various risk responses. Remember, we talked about risk responses in the course. We discussed uh, escalation, transference, and then we talked about mitigation, avoidance, and last one was acceptance. And similarly, we talked about 5 responses for positive risks, opportunities. So these responses are important. I got drag and drop questions from this section. Drag and drop means on one side, 5 responses were written. Opposite to that, there were 5 statements were written. And then you need to cross match. So that cross match question. So it means you have clear conceptual understanding about these different methodologies. And then project methodology, agile versus waterfall. So there would be a lot of question in the exam in which you'll see an organization is transitioning from one methodology to another. So what sort of skill set you need as a project manager? So for example, in some situation, management isn't supporting you. In some situation, the project manager that you have hired does not have the right skill set. Team is not trained. So how you would be handling that situation? So roughly 10 to 15 questions were relevant to project methodology, right? So waterfall, agile, and hybrid, very important. And last thing is you need to understand Scrum framework. Remember, we draw that timeline when we discussed Scrum methodology, like we start with sprint planning meeting, then we conduct daily stand-ups, then we conduct sprint review, then sprint retrospective. So basic understanding of Scrum methodology would be very helpful. So this is a combination of questions that I saw in the exam. I didn't see any question relevant to types of contracts. No question was relevant to different types of documents that we create. For example, procurement management plan, statement of work, bidding documents. I didn't see any such question, but it doesn't mean you completely ignore those topics, right? This is what I'm saying based on my experience. I didn't have any question regarding scheduling, interestingly. There was no question relevant to how we define activities, how we sequence activities, finish to start, start to finish. Nothing was in the exam. There was no question regarding um, how you estimate your duration. There was no question regarding project methodology, project estimation techniques. There was no question regarding contingency reserves, management reserves. No question was in the exam regarding resource optimization, resource leveling, resource smoothing. No question was relevant to schedule compression, like we talked about crashing, fast tracking, critical path method, critical chain method. So I didn't see any such question in the exam. So again, exam was more generic, targeting towards leadership expertise and skill set rather than testing the technicalities and how these things are done. There were no question in the exam regarding risk, qualitative analysis, quantitative analysis, no question regarding probability into impact matrix, no question regarding decision tree, no question regarding sensitivity analysis, tornado diagram, Monte Carlo simulations. There was generic understanding of the risk section in the questions, but there was no specific question targeted towards these tools and techniques. So again, it doesn't mean you ignore those sections, but what I'm saying is you need not to go into that detail, the detail that we covered in the course, right? We went into a lot of details. No question regarding bubble chart and stuff like that. No question regarding stakeholders, appetite, thresholds. So those technical terms were not in the exam. Similarly, from Scrum perspective, there was no question regarding estimation, prioritization, Kano model, pair comparison, monopoly money that we discussed, specific techniques, technicalities from specific Scrum perspective or Agile perspective. So focus was more towards general understanding of project management, and these topics were important in the exam. Cost was not important in the exam. uh, Technicalities of risks were not important in the exam. Procurement was not important in the exam. People side was very important from the exam. So stakeholders, communication, team building, uh, Tuckman team development model, motivation, personality testing, negotiation, conflicts management, decision making. These things were very important from exam perspective. Team building, virtual teams, right? So these were very important. So I hope you have clarity about different types of topics. Next, any calculation or mathematical calculations. I haven't seen any question in the exam in which I had to do any kind of mathematics, no calculation at all. However, I saw one question regarding earned value analysis. It was very simple and very easy. So as we did in the course, if you recall, the last thing that I shared, okay, for example, if your CPI is 0.7 and if your SPI is 1.3, how would you interpret this? So according to this, it looks like the project is over budget and it's ahead of schedule. That's what you need to do in the exam. If you understand what is your schedule variance, what is your cost variance, what is SPI, what is CPI, I think this is more than enough from exam perspective. So if your schedule variance is positive, what does it mean? If your schedule variance is negative, what does it mean? If your SPI is more than one or less than one, similarly CPI. So I think this basic understanding is enough for the exam. I haven't seen any other question in the exam. We spend a lot of time in network diagram, if you recall. Remember critical path analysis, near critical path, float, free float, flexibility, lead, lag, finish to start to start, types of dependencies. We spend a lot of time on that. There were no question in the exam regarding calculations. And even if you see such question in the exam, leave it to respond later because such questions require more time. So good news is you need not to be worried about mathematics because a lot of students ask how many questions we will have in the exam in which we have to do mathematics. So it's a good thing. So what we have discussed so far, we have talked about a portion of different methodologies, major topics, and mathematical calculation related questions. Okay. Length of questions, very important, especially students when they join our PMP sessions, they report that questions are slightly lengthy, questions are difficult. So on average, the length of question was around 80 to 100 words in the exam. 80 to 100 words. So I think it's 3 to 4 lines. So the question that we are having in our mock exams are exactly similar to exam in terms of length of question. So in the start, when we discussed agile, questions were a little longer in terms of text or words. But now from people domain, that questions we are having, the length of the question is more or less similar. So you will be having 2 line long questions, 3 liners, sometimes 4 liners. So 80 to 100 is the average. So length of the question is not an issue. You won't be having too long question where you completely lost your mind. Like, for example, if you have started reading and at the end of the question, you completely lost what you read in the start or in the first line. So length of the question won't be a problem. It would be average. And I think that's good one, right? Not too short, not too long. All right, so language. Uh, a lot of students, they have issues with the language when they mock test. They don't understand specific words. So for example, in our mock exams we use, so they say, okay, it's a tricky question because language, because I don't understand meaning of this word. Exam language would be very simple and very easy to understand. Like if you have basic understanding of English language, you would be able to understand what the question is all about. There won't be any word in the exam that confuses you from language perspective. So language would be very easy and simple and would be much, much better than the mock exams. So language won't be an issue. And interestingly, there would be no distracting information. So there won't be any information in the exam that would distract you. So for example, I can recall a question in, I think it was framework question that we normally do in our course. So there was a question about Six Sigma or something like that. And the answer is Six Sigma related information is irrelevant. It has nothing to do with the question. So you won't see any such information in the exam that distracts you. It would be very clear, very straightforward, to the point, crisp, and precise. So language won't be a problem. Even if, let's suppose, English is your second language, that won't be a problem, okay? In the exam, you won't see any abbreviations, like, for example, WBS, so its work breakdown structure would be written. SOW, statement of work, would be written. So you need not to memorize these abbreviations for the exam. So they would clearly label or write the complete word, and then they add the abbreviation. So you won't see just abbreviation. So you need not to be worried about this. Next, types of questions, very important. So there are different types of questions in the exam. So if we see, 90% of the question in the exam were multiple choice questions, MCQs, in which there would be a statement, 2 to 3 line, and then there would be 4 options, and you have to pick one option. So 90% of the question in the exam would be like this, in which there would be a statement and you have to pick one correct answer. Remaining, I saw some 4 to 5 questions in which you have to choose more than one option, and it would be clearly labeled, like choose two, something like that. Sometime it would say choose three. There was one question in which you have to choose, in which I had to choose three, right? Or choose more than one, and then it would be written 2, 3, or what. So 4 to 5 questions were regarding multiple selections. Two to three questions were drag and drop, cross match. So for example, you will be given, let's suppose, risk escalation. And then it was transference, as I mentioned earlier, mitigation, avoidance, and the last one is acceptance, let's suppose. And then there were some statements written here, right? So you need to drag and drop to match each term with the right statement. So there's an option of drag and drop. You can hover over an option and then drag it to the top of the right option or the statement. So I saw 2 or 3, I guess. I'm not very sure. 2 to 3 were drag and drop questions, right? And then I saw 2 questions which were hotspot questions. Now, what is hotspot question? Hotspot question is, so for example, they will show you a graph, right? So for example, this is and they will ask you, okay, which portion of the graph represents the statement? So for example, the statement is team is not performing well, the progress is going down, project manager is worried. So check the spot where project manager is worried. So there were 3 or 4 or 5, sometimes 6 spots. So for example, it would be like this. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And you need to click the right one. Okay, it looks like, for example, this is the portion where project manager is worried because there is no progress. There is a flat line, right? So that is more like interpreting the graph. So 2 questions were like that, which were hotspot. Okay, I hope it is clear. So this is distribution of types of question in the exam. So 90% questions were relevant to multiple choice question where you need to pick one. All right, so memorization versus conceptual understanding. People ask questions, do we need to memorize something? Some memorization is required. Some memorization. When I use word some, means 4 to 5 or 6, 7 questions were based on memorization. For example, there was a question about Parkinson's law, right? There was a question about student syndrome. There was a question about MBTI, Myers-Briggs type indicator. So you need to understand and memorize those characteristics, right? So some memorization is required, but most of the exam was conceptual understanding. Even if you don't memorize anything, it would be okay. Maybe you'll end up losing 3 or 4 points, but these are also important for exam. For example, if you are just on the edge. So memorization, some memorization is required for the exam, especially for such terminologies. All right. So next, very important topic. What sort of depth of knowledge is tested in the exam? So I have divided into different sections. So first, exam would test your technical knowledge. So what is meant by technical knowledge? So sometimes you need to understand depth of the statement or the question. So for example, I have written one of the questions. This question was also in our mock exams. I hope you recall. So, for example, the question is how work breakdown structure should be organized by cost, by deliverables, by customers, by teams. Now, we know what is work breakdown structure. We know when work breakdown structure is developed. We all also know different levels of work breakdown structure. Remember, we talked about 4 levels of work breakdown structure: name, control accounts, planning packages, work packages. But sometime examiner goes to this level of depth as well. Now, this answer or this question would be answered only if somebody is developing or has developed work breakdown structure. So sometimes you see such questions as well. You understand? But the percentage of these type of question is just 10%. So in 10% of the question, you'll see such level of detail. Like if you're actually doing this work. So for example, how many level of schedules do we have when we develop project schedules? So there could be 2-level schedule, there could be 3-level schedule, level 4, level 5. But what is the right level? On which basis we decide? So you'll see such questions as well in the exam. But the good thing is that the percentage of these questions is very low, as I mentioned. It's just 10%, right? You'll see some questions in change management. So change management process understanding is very important step by step. Remember, we talked about various steps. First, change request form is filled, then it is submitted, change log is updated, preliminary impact assessment is done, detailed impact assessment is done. So we talked about those steps. Understanding those steps is very important because you'll be able to answer 3 or 4 questions right if you know the sequence of those steps. So that is also important. Tools and techniques, very important. So there are a lot of tools and techniques that we covered in the course, almost more than 50 or maybe more than that. So some of the techniques which are important, which I had in my exam, stakeholders engagement assessment matrix, understanding of this is very important. Risk response strategies, decision tree analysis, control charts, information radiators. Why I have written decision tree analysis here, there was a question in which it was mentioned, but the question was not relevant to decision tree analysis. It was just an option, right? So sometime if you understand an option, you can easily eliminate that. So from that perspective, it is important. So understanding of tools and techniques is also important. This is from the technical, side of the test. But again, it is just 10%. For example, you need to understand the difference between acceptance criteria, definition of done, definition of ready. These are technical terminologies which are important from exam. Work in progress limit, very important. I saw a hotspot question regarding work in progress limit. Very tricky question, very difficult question. Even I struggled while answering that question. So sometime you see such questions as well, right? So WIP limit is important. Spike, very important. There was another hotspot question regarding spike. So spike and its impact, very important. So when you conduct a risk spike, how it affect your total workload. So something like that. And risk response strategies I have already mentioned. So from technical side, you'll see 10% of the questions which would be slightly challenging. And for that, you need to understand the deep concepts in order to respond to these questions. But again, good thing is it's just 10%. You won't see a lot of question in the exam regarding technical side. Okay. Then a lot of question in the exam would be relevant to best practices. So project management best practices. This is relatively easier as well as trickier area. Easier because this is based on our day-to-day work, how we perform work. So for example, you might have noticed in our PMP QA sessions, most of the question you're able to answer because this is how you do that work, right? But the downside or negative side or demerit is that sometimes we do things differently from what PMI prescribes. So in that situation, we fall into trouble. So for example, let me give you an option, a question like how a question could be structured. So you're closing a project and you want to plan lessons learned for your project. As a project manager, what you should do. Invite Scrum Master and team as mandatory participants. Ask them to join. Invite them as optional members and request them to document lesson learned submit. So you'll see question like that. Now, there is nothing technicality involved in this question, no technique. It's a simple question. You want to document lessons learned. So what you will be doing? Would the Scrum Master and team, they are mandatory participants, they are optional, you just ask them or you ask them to provide you written lessons learned. Now, this question has nothing to do with technical processes. It's best practices, one of the best practices in project management, like whenever you document lessons learned, invite all key stakeholders as mandatory participants so that you're able to document as many lessons learned as possible. Now, it has nothing to do with any technicality. This is one of the best practices. If you really want to document lessons learned, you should focus. Now, question looks very simple, but it's not. You'll end up, okay, request them to document lesson learned because we want to document lesson learned. So you can request them because you don't force people. So on one side, there is an element of autonomy. There is an element of freedom. We have learned the concept of self-organized team. On the other hand, one of the best practices is whenever you document lessons learned during closure, invite all the people as mandatory participants. So you'll see similar questions, very tricky questions, but from statement perspective, very simple and very easy. You can see it's a very short question and very simple. I have just, modified it because again, I can't show you the real questions and I exactly don't recall the statement as well. I'm giving you a relevant example, like how you can expect questions. 30% of the question in the exam would be relevant to best practices, where you don't need right, technical knowledge, but those would be based on, as a project manager, what you would be doing there. So for example, I have written some of the best practices. I will be writing more, like 100 points. Some of them I have already written, but I have presented a few of them here. So for example, what are PMP best practices? Investigate the problem first before reaching a solution. We have been discussing again and again in almost every session. Give autonomy and freedom to team members. Do not directly escalate. Try to solve the problem. Provide training or mentoring if there is a skill gap. Do direct communication with the relevant person. Face-to-face meetings or communication is the best form of communication. Be a servant leader. Discuss things with the team before making a decision. Be transparent in your communication. Understand stakeholders' needs. Involve stakeholders in the process. Do not directly remove or replace a team member, even if performance is low, right? Keep everything aligned with the organizational vision. If someone isn't cooperating, approach them proactively and explain the importance. Minimize the number of meetings of virtual teams where all the team members are required. Make information available, follow the change management procedures. So these are some of the best practices that you need to understand in order to respond to these questions. I'll be sharing 100 best practices with you. I have written, I just need to review them. So tomorrow, hopefully, or the day after tomorrow, I'll be sharing those 100 points, and those would be really, really helpful. If you understand these points, then this portion won't be a problem for you. You'll be able to answer these questions. So for that, maybe um, the book won't be very relevant, or the course won't be very relevant, because in course is more aligned towards mechanical project management, but this is more humanistic as a project manager, how you would be dealing with the situation. So best practice is very important section. All right, the most challenging and the only difficult part in the exam is sequence. A lot of question in the exam, you will see what project manager should do next. So what project manager should do next? What is the first action that project manager need to do? And what project manager should have done? So you'll see a lot of question in the exam in like this, where sequence of activities is very important. And we also have so many questions in our PMP mock exam sessions as well, where sequencing is important. So for example, um, you are a project manager for a hybrid project. Due to external enterprise environmental factor, the product is not useful, so is no more useful. So what you would do first? So you are managing a hybrid project. Due to any change in externalities, now the product that you are developing is no more useful for the customer. What you would be doing first? Stop the project, assess changes in enterprise environmental factors, release resources, and seek advice from sponsor. So apparently it's a simple question. There is no language problem, no distracting information, very straight, very simple, short, precise, but the question is very challenging, right? So you'll see a lot of question in the exam in which you need to understand first, last, next, best. What is the best course of action? What is the next course of action? What PM should have done? What is the first choice? Right? If it is first, question would be different. If it is best, question answer would be different. If it is should have done, answer would be different. Read the statement carefully. I have seen most of the students, when they read the statement, they read first half of the statement and they get an impression of the answer. They don't go to the detail of the later part of the statement where it is written. So, for example, if it is written, what PM should have done, now the question would be entirely different. Answer would be entirely different. So read the statement complete and identify if it is asking for the first action, last action, most important action, or what. So for example, in this, assess changes in EF and recommend shift. That's the right answer, right? So this is just one of the examples. So you'll see a lot of question in the exam like this. Roughly 40 to 50% of the question in the exam would be like this. And this is probably the most challenging area in the exam, right? That's very important. Okay, next, I have added one more questions. So I hope you could see. So key stakeholders key stakeholder need more comprehensive reporting than the current one. What should PM do first? So there's a stakeholder, you're sending reports or you're communicating with that stakeholder. However, they require more information, right? They require comprehensive information. So what should we be doing first? Modify format of the report that you're sending, give stakeholder access to reporting dashboard, organize review of information radiators, meet with stakeholder to discuss needs. Again, very simple question, straightforward, precise, to the point, but very complicated when it comes to answering, right? So correct answer is meet stakeholder to discuss the needs. If somebody is saying, I modify this, I need comprehensive information, what is meant by comprehensive, right? Try to approach that individual, understand the need, and then do modification. So maybe you will be modifying, but that's not the first choice. This is the problem most of you have faced during mock exam sessions. So if the question is about do first, you would be choosing, okay, modify format or this. But first of all, you need to understand the problem, understand the situation, analyze the situation, then go for the solution. So you'll see a lot of question in the exam like this. Very simple, straight, but very tricky. So 40 to 50% of the exam would be like this. Then there would be some questions that which are relevant to PMIism. So PMI has its own framework, its own structure of presenting information. So for example, process groups. So you need to understand what is initiation, what is planning, what is execution, what is monitoring and controlling and closing. These are basics that we do understand, and most of you perform well in these areas. You need to understand what is charter. In many organizations, there is no concept of charter. They don't develop charter. They use another name for these documents, but PMI uses this terminology, project charter. So for formal initiation, you need to have a project charter. So you need to understand this PMIism as well, right? So there's a certain sequence that you need to follow. Certain terminologies, charter, business case, project management plan, process group, project methodologies. So you need to spend some time on PMIism is that, right? That is also important, but portion of the questions is just 5%. And some questions would be common sense, right? Even if you haven't studied for the exam, anyone who's working, they are able to answer those questions. For example, I have given one of the questions. So team members are not following the ground rules. Team members are not following the ground rules. What PM should do? Arrange a meeting to discuss the issue, escalate to HR, talk to functional manager, or notify project sponsor. I hope all of you are able to answer this question, right? If not, consider attending my course again. So arrange a meeting to discuss the issue, right? Very simple question. So first of all, whenever there is a problem, talk to those individuals. So these are common sense, simple things that we do in our day to day. So you'll see 10% of the question relevant to this area, which would be very easy to answer. So exam would be combination of 10% would be very easy, 10% would be very tough, as I mentioned here. These 10% would be very challenging questions, right? And then these 10% would be very easy question. And then these 30% and 40 to 50%, this 70, 80% is the real test for you, right? Specifically, this particular area is very important, right? So I hope you're clear about what sort of questions you can expect in the exam. So some would test your technical knowledge, portion is very less. Best practice is very important from exam. Sequencing is very important from exam. So you should focus on these areas while preparing for the exam. Okay. Right. Time management, very important. So I hope you know there are three sections of the exam. When you'll start the exam, so you'll have section 1 where you will be having 100 to 60 questions. Then there would be a break, optional break for 10 minutes. Then section 2, another break, and then section 3, 60 questions in each question. Now, you need to spend time something which I have mentioned, 80, 75, 75, something like that. 80 minutes, maximum 80 minutes on first session, then 75 minutes, then 75 minutes. If you are able to do this, then you are on track. If you are left with 60 minutes in last session, that would be challenging. So you will be having around 76 seconds for one questions. So try to follow this rule. 80 minutes for session one, 75 and 75, right? And with the passage of time, your speed also increases because you're used to reading and understand the question. Okay, so 76 seconds for one question. Do not mark a lot of questions for review. I have seen a lot of students, what they do is they mark 20 questions for review in one session out of 60. You won't be having this much time to review 20 questions. You can mark 2, 3, 4, or 5 maximum. There is no point of marking 20 questions for review. So you can mark a question for review. When you're done with 60 questions, you can click on review, and the simulator or that software will open those questions directly. Rather than you are looking for those questions, you can directly access those questions which you mark for review. So for example, if you're confused about a question and you think like if you spend more time on this question, then maybe you'll find a better option, you can mark it, right? Or there's a question that requires more time, you can mark it for review. So this is also, you can do that. Take break, must take break. Breaks are important. You can take 2 10 minutes break, which are important after each session. So do take breaks. Okay. Another question people ask, how much time we need to spend in preparation? Ideally, you should not spend more than 30 days. This is the ideal time. If you could manage 2 to 3 hours on daily basis, 30 days is the ideal time for preparation. I have seen students who write exam in 20 days, in 10 days. Surprisingly, one of my students, she completed my course on Friday and she scheduled her exam on Sunday. On Friday, she completed the course and Sunday she scheduled the exam. She got her application approved earlier because she had another certification based on that. So I don't recommend this. There were certain situation from the work side, that's why she had to do that. And I also don't recommend spending a year on this certification or 5 months or 6 months. 30 days or maximum 40 days is the ideal time for preparation. 80 to 90 hours of dedicated studies required to pass the exam. 80 to 90 hours. If you could dedicate 80 to 90 hours, more than enough, right? There is no need to spend more time in it. If you're very smart, efficient, maybe you'll do with 60 hours, but 80 to 90 hours is the ideal time that you need to spend for preparation, entire preparation. Okay. Very important question, resources. What you need to study. What are the resources? First, write project management course from a PMI authorized instructor. This is for everyone, not for those who have taken my course, right? This is for everyone who would be watching this video later on YouTube. Selection of the right institute or right instructor is very important. So go for PMI authorized instructor because they would teach the right material, they would teach the latest material. So go for that. And when you select your instructor, ask about what they would be providing, what resources they would be providing, right? So right course number one, 35 contact hours of our professional development unit. And then I recommend one good book for exam preparation. A lot of instructors say you need not to read a book. Maybe after my course, you need not to read a book, right? Because of the comprehensive nature of the course and everything. Maybe you need not to read the book. But still, I recommend read a book because book would give you another perspective. And whatever we cover in course, um, that would be substantiated. You will feel more confident. You'll get a different perspective or more information, more clarity about that. So read one good book. If you are comfortable reading Project Management Body of Knowledge Guide, perfect. You can read that. I read PMBOK guide for my preparation, right? But some people feel like it's dry, it's not easy to understand. You can use any other book. For example, you can use PMP Exam Prep by RMC, right? That is also one of the good books for the exam. You can read that as well, right? So if you have any of these books, you're good to go. Take the course, read the book, at least read twice. And then the most important thing is write practice exam, very important. This is probably the most important resources for the exam. If you're not practicing good quality mock exams questions, it's difficult for you to pass the exam because mock exam is the key. For mock exam, you can solve my 1800 questions, very important, almost similar to real exam. If you solve those, there is no chance you would be failing the exam. And next thing is weekly Q&A session, super important. If you attend these sessions, you'll be automatically preparing for the exam because the quality of the questions is amazing. We spend almost 1 hour to 2 hours in developing one question, and then it goes for a review. We have uh, a committee of expert. They review these questions. Sometime when we uh, postpone the session, the only reason is that the questions are not reviewed by experts. So we have developed the question and everything is done, but we do not receive the review. That's why we have to postpone the session. There is no other reason. So a lot of effort and time is being spent on these questions. You can find these sessions on YouTube, and you can scan this Zoom link to attend that. Every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday we conduct at 9 p.m. EST. Maybe we will change the time because I'm getting a lot of requests from students like 9 p.m. is too late, so maybe we will change it to 8 p.m. EST, but we will notify you. So we conduct every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. We discuss 10 questions. So these are very important. If you solve my questions and you attend these mock exams, at least I can guarantee you won't be failing the exam. If you fail exam after that, then we need to reconsider our entire training program and everything. Because after going through this extensive studies and solving these mock exams, there is no chance you'll end up failing the exam. And another important resource, PMI, PMP notes. Most of you have those notes, so I can just show you. Uh, Again, I would still recommend reading a book, but if you don't want to read a book, you can go through my notes. So these notes cover 100%, or I would say 120% of the course content. A lot of detail is added, very precise, to the point. All topics are covered from topic 1 till topic last topic. So you can see lesson number 1, basics, foundations. These are very interactive. So one of my students who passed the exam, Amand, recently, he was like, when you teach and you draw these things, they stick to the mind. He was saying when he was attempting the real exam, he was saying those notes were in his mind. So they have all the lessons, right? So you can see everything is in detail, very, very interactive. And if you just go through these, I don't think you need to, worry about any concept, because uh, these concepts are presented with a lot of clarity, with diagrams, with so all the topics are discussed from people perspective, from processes perspective, from business perspective. So you can go through these notes. These would be really helpful to you. Okay. Last thing, if you are still confused, you need any information, you can contact on this number. My team would be responding to you, to your request, anything. If you need information about upcoming courses, if you need information about anything regarding PMP exam, feel free to contact. That's it from my side. I hope I have covered most of the things, and you got all of your answers. But still, if you have any question, feel free to ask. Let me just read the chat. In the chat, I have some questions. So what should you do next? What is the best thing to do? What should you do first? Yes, I mentioned there are 40 to 50% of the questions were like that. Next is, yes. So the question is, the problem with sequence related questions is uh, they depend upon specific or individual's judgment or their subjective. Yes, they are absolutely right, and you can only learn through practice. That's why you need to do mock exams. So you're right. Like different people have different perspective about these sequences or how to do these activities, but you can learn through practice. This would be helpful. All right, so right. Any tips for the application? For application, I have made another video. You can watch that video, but for application, write in the form of 3 or 4 headings. First, write project objective, then describe your project, and then write your role and responsibility. Do not write team's contribution. Do not write organization's contribution. Write what you have contributed to the project. And recently, I have seen a trend. What my students are doing, when I ask them to write the application, they say, okay, I was appointed as a project manager. The very first thing I did, I developed project charter. After that, I identified stakeholders. I developed stakeholder register. Then I develop vision statement. After that, I select project management methodology. Then I develop PMP. PMP contains 10 different areas. Then I develop charter. Means there was nobody in the team. Everything was done by that particular individual. Don't do that, right? Just write whatever you did in the project or whatever you are doing or have been doing. Write your contribution. Don't just be jack of all trade or like you have done everything. It's not possible. Write your specific contribution. Like as a project manager, your job is engagement. In order to engage stakeholders, you develop a specific mechanism, right? Or you developed an issues management system, or there was a specific challenge, how you handle that challenge. So be specific. And do not just publish standard, which is publish text which is already there in the standards, right? As I mentioned, I have given you examples, and I will be sharing one application as reference as well, because there's a trend. I have seen 10 applications in last week which I have reviewed, and all of them are similar. Maybe people, when they attend my course, they see, okay, this is the sequence, okay, let's write that. So all the things that we discuss, they write in the sequence, like table of contents. This is not PMP application. Be specific to your contribution. Do not rephrase published uh, text, and write about your own work, not about your teammates, not about your organization. Don't spend too much text on explaining the project. PMI is interested in your contribution, not in project. So I have seen people write 300 words, and on 300 words, 200 words are about project. So project is this we would be delivering, and these are different phases of the project. No, just briefly explain the project in 1 or 2 lines and write around 300 to 400 words or 500 words about your role and responsibility, specific role. So these are some of the guidelines regarding application. All right. Any question, anyone, regarding how to prepare for the exam? Anyone, please.
I would like just to know one technical question. Can you reschedule the exam? Because it's obviously that test centers are full and there are only like 2 spots for the month.
Yeah, you can reschedule the exam. Absolutely. If you do it 30 days before your exam day, it would be free of cost. If it is after 30 days, then you need to pay $70. It could vary, but based on my recent information, it's $70 for rescheduling the exam within 30 days. And I think before 24 hours or 48 hours, you cannot reschedule, something like that. If centers do not have, slots, you can write exam at home. I took my exam online at home, and it was smooth. There wasn't any problem. Take care of precautions. You can write exam online at home as well.
Yes. So I was reading for exam online, and it says like almost nothing should be in the room except for some like small things. So almost I can't find the room like this clean for exam standards.
No, I don't think so. I mean, you can take the exam at home. Just make sure that there is no reading material in your room. Nobody distracts you. Nobody should enter the room while you are taking the exam. Nobody should disturb you. Your phone shouldn't be with you, and you should be visible uh, throughout the exam. You shouldn't, move away from the camera. If you need to go, you need permission. So I think if you take care of these uh, rules or protocols, it's all set. There won't be any problem. So yes, make sure that the software they use uh, is compatible to your computer. You don't have any kind of disruptions, network disruptions, electricity problem. If you don't have such issues, writing the exam at home is a good choice if you're not able to find slots. Okay. Right. Any other question? Anyone, please? Neeraj?
Yeah, one question. So actually, I have one old book like that is a reference to the PMBOK F5, right? So is it advisable to refer that, or we should always go with the latest version?
Of course, latest version. PMBOK 5 is old, so I don't recommend that.
Okay.
All right.
It's totally the course changes, right? And not the only like about the percentage and all.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of things have changed. So 5, 6, now it's 7, so it's
Seven.
entirely different.
Okay.
All
Thank
right.
you.
When I wrote exam for the first time, it was more technical, right? A lot of questions, processes, technicalities, tools and techniques. And this time there wasn't anything like that in the exam. All right. Any other question? Do you recommend study 2 or 3 days before or just relax? Not 2 or 3 days, like last day, if you don't want to study, it's okay. But I would strongly recommend take a week off from work. Strongly, I recommend. I have seen students who have recently passed the exam. Most of them, they have taken a week or couple of weeks off. So do consider this if you can. If you don't have this option, it's okay, but do consider this. That would be really helpful. So dedicated studies during the last days would be really helpful. But not 2, 3 days ago. Last day, if you don't want to study, it's okay. No problem. Bilal?
For the drag and drop questions, do we need to memorize the data process flow charts for waterfall and agile?
No, you need not to memorize.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Any other question? No question? All set? All right, so I would be sharing 100 good practices, 100 pointers. Those would be helpful for you for your exam.
How do I get the practice questions?
That I will be discussing later. You can contact me, okay?
Okay, thank you.
So did you take the exam at a center? No, I took exam at home, not at center. All right. I hope we have discussed most of the things. Thank you so much for joining. I hope this session would be really helpful for your preparation. Wish you all best of luck. Prepare well. Don't hesitate to contact me if you need any help regarding exam. Thank you so much. Take care. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good.
Bye.